G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 1st of December 2025. As the war continues, there has been peace talks for the last couple of days, and there is hope that the war will end soon. Of course, there are a lot of people out there who seem genuinely disappointed. But you know, there's still time for you to go join the Ukraine army if you're really disappointed. Because I don't think a lot of people who glaze for Zelensky know what's going on in Ukraine, let alone on the battlefront. Because trust me, covering this war, the Ukrainians put up a good fight, but a mismanaged fight. And Ukrainian supporters don't want to hear it, don't want to see it, don't want to know it. They have blood on their hands for supporting a war for their own amusement. Because quite frankly, I don't see any logic in their glee. But it's, you know, you get told to put a Ukraine flag in their bio, and they do it. They listen to the shill media, although a lot of them, you know, The Guardian and The Sun, The Telegraph, CNN, ABC, New York Times, and they urge they claim, but they make it sound like they're supporting some glorious crusade. No. I think it's summed up best by saying you have two sides that bitterly hate each other, and it doesn't make sense that Europe would want Ukraine and then urge Ukraine to go to war against Russia. But, you know, my fears and paranoia dominate the European thinking rather than cold realities. But the reality is Europe is finding itself increasingly desperate for funds. It is rumoured that Ursula is always lying, begged America to reconsider its position. Trump has stood strong and said, nope, you want a Ukraine war, you fund it. And they realised that even if they took all the money from Russia that they've allegedly got, because we don't know for certain, the banks will just see it whittled away. Those assets will never get sold for what they're allegedly worth. And then the banks face other nations pulling out and a further erosion. Because all these nations that de-dollarized went to euro, they're going to abandon the euro. Particularly India. Good luck getting... Now, of course, the US thinks that they're going to fill the gaps with the world oil. That's not going to happen either. There's just simply not enough production to meet demand by any one country. And even if they step up demand, they're just burning through more oil faster to deliver it. And eventually, those nations they sanctioned will end up being the only ones with oil. Then see how you like having Russia dominate the oil market. People play themselves all the time because they always look short term. They always want instant gratification. That's why most people have tuned out by now, because they don't want the truth. The truth hurts their fifis. As we look around the battlefield, Dnipro got hit, and got hit hard. But the worst hit today was Dnipro. Oh, not Dnipro, sorry. Wasn't Dnipro. It was Kherson. Kherson, and its outskirts on the Ukrainian side, was shelled. Now, there is a big fire in north of Kherson. The shelling set fire to various Ukrainian positions and spread. As you can see, there's a flame plume captured from the explosion of a tank. You can barely see its silhouette, which is an irony, because earlier today, videos were coming out about the miracle tank that was going to save Ukraine. The T-84, Ukraine's mighty tank, the Ukrainian Tiger to take on the T-90. Russian artillery made short work of those tanks today. Not even an hour on the battlefield. And the early prototype, now that they're claiming, was just a test model. Now, we don't know exactly. Russia claims to have destroyed 6 vehicles. Probably right. They didn't say which vehicles. So, you don't know how many tanks there were. There might have only been one. There might have been none. It might have been the typical Ukrainian barking by, British intelligence. It was the Guardian after all. But this is the thing. You don't know what's propaganda half the time. So, I have no verification that there is a T-84 in existence, that Ukraine is building hundreds of them. It is all cope, smoke, and mirrors. Sorry. I shouldn't get worked up. I should really, really, really try not to. But it really boils my blood how much lies they go on about the war. Now, there was a photograph of a tank. It is alleged to be a T-84. It looks more like a Russian tank repainted. And that is probably where they got these 100 or so tanks from. If you remember, a general back in 2022 tried to race into Kiev. 32 tanks were captured, and that's where I think this alleged hundreds of tanks are coming from. Is it some scrap, some tanks that were scrapped, some tanks that were abandoned in the early days of the war, were hauled off to Poland, repainted, retooled by Germany. Now, the 130mm gun is not new, and it's not Ukrainian. It is German. Again, West is shooting itself in the foot and giving credit to Ukraine for stuff they haven't done. It's like the idiot who created the George Foreman grill. Yeah, he was a genius, but then he didn't put his name on it, so most of the money went to George Foreman. And then, to cope, the inventor said, "Oh, I'm just happy George Foreman made $129 million off me. I am so happy I'm only I got a few million from it." It's like, my God. Some people are such self-defeating idiots. Alright, so there is no movement in the north. Bit of drone activity over Ukraine, not much really. There's a bit of advance here, but they're advancing on, the Russians, that is advancing on Claude Zane. They are meeting Ukrainian resistance. Ukraine continues to hold the Russians back here in Kupiansk and in the area north of Lyman. There is lots of activity with no apparent or immediate success. That is not unusual. Some sieges can go for months before the Russians move in. It's alleged that the Russians advanced, took some territory, but no, I think that flag is out of place. The Russians have made some advances here in Kursk, not much. It is small. It is closing off this area where the Ukrainians continue to hold out on the outskirts. Same here. They're closing off slowly the territory, but it is slow work. It's a slog. Remember, the Russians do not have overwhelming manpower on the battlefield. They are holding 700,000 in reserve in case of invasion by Europe. Yesterday it was reported that Europe was going to move a step closer to war. The reason why I didn't cover it, I thought it was bunk, that Europe would back off, and they did. They've done this so many times. Now, Russia's made a play towards Voloshniki, but they haven't crossed the railroad, but they have increased their territory. They've made other plays to close the gap here. They're still clearing in Pokrovsk and still sending assault forces in the Myriad. Assault forces elsewhere with very little success, but that often happens. These are just softening up the Ukrainian defenders, feeling out their positions, and then you get here in the West a full offensive with some territorial gains, and some assault forces into Territorial with shelling of the town. This is mostly to keep the Ukrainians busy while the Russians secure their flanks to prevent a Ukrainian counterattack. But the Russians continue to march and push towards Zaporizhzhia they need to cut these roads, because cutting this supply route here weakens the supply route here into Ulpol, forcing more through this, which is under fire control. Same with here, under fire control. This is a long, easy route for them, so the Russians must cut the road any way they can. Of course, most of the resources are coming out of Dnipro. So it is not an easy time for either side, but vehicles burn in Kherson. Forest where Ukrainians were stationed is burning. We don't know the depths, but it is a cold day, all day, near 4 degrees Celsius, which is 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Some light rain with more rain through the week, and weather's plunging even further towards 0. That is the maximum, by the way, 0. Freezing. Freezing temperatures for this is said to be the worst winter since 2022. And the weather for Ukraine, a high of 48 did not last. They didn't reach it. The temperature was meant to be 48. It only reached 40. The weather yesterday, though was worse, but today it's only light rain, allowing the Russians more fighting time. They are issuing not just winter gear, but heavy rain gear and thermal underwear. They are preparing for the coldest winter. Now, it may not look like it, but there are peace talks. Marco Rubio and his delegation dominated most of the media, not just here, but in Ukraine and Russia. Most of the Ukrainian delegation was silent, as it was the last day that Zelensky's right-hand man appeared. After a brief conversation with Witkoff, he left and never returned. He was basically introducing his replacement. Though it appears he was photographed, but here is his replacement, and other media still shows the photograph of him in it. No, he was replaced, and they're not talking about his replacement. But the situation is delicate. It's complicated, says Marco Rubio. Why? Well, we're talking about the sovereignty of Ukraine, and Ukraine doesn't want to give up land. But, as the Americans point out, you want to keep losing land? So, what they need is something to sell this deal to the people. Well, I think, and this is the biggest problem, is that there's a great divide. I think half of Ukraine wants a fight, and then the other half will let them. But then, because pretty much, here's the problem. Zelensky is now realizing that he's killing his base. People aren't going to vote for him. The survivors aren't going to vote for him. The people who want this war won't vote for him if he ends it. But if they go fight it, he has nobody to vote for him anyway. So that's complicated, folks. Now, you never know. He might be able to turn this around. Ermanov, who's the replacement for Zelensky's right-hand man, though he's already one of the negotiators. He's always been there. He's not entitling you. He's just not making headlines like his other comrades have. And in Ukraine, it's very dangerous to make headlines, because then people want to tear you down, find out how much you're worth and how much you've made. In fact, that's not a bad thing. I think there should be more Americans, more Australians, more New Zealanders, more Russians, more Canadians, more Ugandans, all looking into their own politicians, so instead of having all these Bangladeshis and Pakistanis tearing into Trump, how about they tear into their own people and look at their own corruption? So I'm pretty sure Imran Khan did appoint a few of his relatives. Though, I think that's not worth the jail time. And I think, given how many Pakistani prime ministers have hired their relatives, I mean, come on. But, of course, Pakistan is constantly destabilized by Pakistani intelligence. And often they can fabricate a story so quickly and so widespread, by the time the riots have settled down, everybody's left the building or the country, and you had yet another soft coup succeed, where courts will rubber stamp the guilty verdict without a real trial. And then the people years later find out it was all a fake again. But the talks do not have a set deadline. The talks continue in Geneva. Soon, the talks will shift briefly to Moscow, where Marco Rubio will remain in talks with the Ukrainian delegation, but they will take a brief break while Steve Witkoff takes the amended 26-point plan back to Moscow, this is the backwards and forwards, but it is how it is. This backwards and forwards talk will take place tomorrow afternoon in the Kremlin. Several closed doors meetings will occur, which means there are various interest groups, which means Putin may have the power of the Russian president, but he does not have absolute power. He still needs the approval of the Russian Duma, and the Security Council needs to go over the plan. So he'll brief Putin, brief the Security Council, brief the Duma representatives, and then those three will sort out in their own little minds. And this is why things are so complicated, because everybody has a hand in it, wanting their name on the document, but not wanting to do the hard work to get it all done. That is the power and privilege of winning wars. You get to dominate. Otherwise, people wouldn't fight wars, which is, I suppose, in a way, why so many don't want Russia to get a victory, because it shatters their ego, because they want their victory. They want to feel like they're the winner, even though they did none of the hard work. That is what virtue signaling does. And yeah, I'm sure all the people at home who had a hard time during World War II were heroes too. They were there in spirit. They gave up their Sunday lunch roast just so American soldiers can have a little bit of beef in their beef stew. You know? You look at the major consumption. It only fell 7%. Most of the, there was no beef shortage. It was all artificial. It was all to drive up prices. And I bet you a big load of that food post-war went straight into the warehouses of the black marketeers. Now, Russia wants to be equal partners in these peace talks. They do not want to be talked down to or lectured by Ukraine. They do not want America to push them around either. They want to secure a peace deal in Ukraine. Security guarantees have to work both ways. The Ukrainian team, however, does not want to offer security guarantees to ethnic Russians who remain in Ukraine. They have held numerous talks. I do honestly think the majority of ethnic Russians who did not fight for Ukraine have left, and those who remain will leave. I know it's a difficult position they're in, but come on. Nobody can guarantee your safety if you're a Russian in Ukraine. Nobody can. So these are going to be difficult talks, mostly about what to do with all the displaced people, how to move them, who bears the cost, where housing, rebuilding schedules. Again, a lot of the talks are behind the scenes. And trust me when I say the various Jared Kushner's there representing the financial people who are going to be loaning the money. And one of the security guarantees is Russian investments and redevelopment and resumption of development. Plus, there is a growing situation. That is, Russia is also dealing with a destabilized Iran. Now, after the Israeli bombings, the Iranian news services and Iranian the Iranian news services were mostly down. Foreign reporters briefly went to Iran, and they did not see the same Iran they saw 5 years ago. A lot of the cities are empty. A lot of the mosques have closed. There's a lot of unemployed people living in the outskirts of Iran throughout the mountains, eking out a living on whatever state welfare they can and whatever food they can scrape together with what limited farming they have. Most of the state's water resources were diverted to these huge dam projects, and they've created now themselves a water shortage because, well, the rainfall has decreased. Which is an irony. Normally when you hoard water in these dams, it creates an increase in rainfall. Somehow in Iran, they've managed to decrease their rainfall, pump out lots of groundwater, and in some cases they have sinkholes 13 meters deep. That is huge. That is like a whole building could vanish into it. And there are parts of Tehran that have sunk and is still sinking. And Russia is trying to pour in water and other resources to build desalination plants and relocate the capital. They've already got many abandoned housing projects in Iran. It's an existential threat to BRICS. If Iran collapses, and this is the big if, China and Russia don't look like they can save it. They are trying now to save Iran, but they can't save Iran. Iran will be forced to turn to its neighbours, and its neighbours will instantly demand it cease ties with BRICS and Russia. Iraq, Syria, although Syria wants normalised relations with Russia, they don't want ties with Russia. They are looking to end the Russian and other foreign bases in Syria, not just the ones we know about, but all bases. They want peacekeepers gone, everybody gone. Although that's going to take time. It'll be a long time, I think, before peacekeepers leave southern Syria. But Saudi Arabia, who does have a say in this apparently, has already said that no rescue of Iran will go ahead with the Ayatollah in charge. So, they are planning for the collapse of Iran right now. This is what Trump, and this is one of the things Trump was talking about when he talks about there are other bigger pressing issues. Because if Iran collapses and there's a power vacuum, there could be an invasion by Iraq as the Shia militia move in to support the failing government. There could be Hezbollah could make a play to distract the Middle East, bog them down, although Hezbollah seemed to be also in the process of collapsing. It appears Israel has pretty much neutralized, and also with the speed they've built their second desalination plant, they have many, including Saudi Arabia, rubbing their hands together. And Iran and even Iraq wanting pipelines now of water to go alongside their oil pipelines, and may actually look at to reduce the burden of shipping, of course, in the Middle East, to sea pipelines from Iran through to ports. If, of course, they're talking about the revitalization of the port of Gaza. Now, countries, of course, are putting conditions on this. Israel is balking at this. But it'll be like a Syrian peace deal. Eventually, Saudi Arabia and Turkey will tell Israel that, remember, you do not have our support if you do not meet us at least halfway on key issues. And they're going to make Palestine a key issue. This is so will France, Germany. The pressure on Israel is great. And this will definitely undermine Ukraine's position, because a lot of this foreign aid that would be destined for Ukraine will be divided between Gaza, Syria, because the US is not increasing their foreign aid, and Europe cannot afford to increase their foreign aid. So a collapsed Iran might actually go ahead and see aid from the Middle East that would normally go to Syria and Gaza, but that is just the way it is, isn't it? Europe will give token amounts, America will give token amounts, but nobody's increasing their aid. As you know, the world has pretty much saw what's happening in China, and they realise that if we're not paying down our debts, we'll end up the same way. That we cannot continue with disaster economics. What is disaster economics? Spend until we go to war and then destroy all assets and have the profiteers profit off the rebuilding, and then a decade we're out of debt, and then back to overspending, over consuming, and pretty much running resources in the ground, trying to sell it for as cheap as we can to make as much as we can before the next disaster. We do need to space our spending. We do need to have companies slightly more profitable than they are, paying more taxes, but things. So instead of constant inflation to pay down debt, we have real returns and real tax revenue and decreased spending on aid. The less we spend on aid, because the less people who need aid, the better the world will be. But Liberals only care about short-term gain when they can pay themselves $495,000 and then realise they can manipulate the public into thinking that all this aid money is going to the poor. To the poor, I tell you. No, the only people who are profiting off aid are all the NGOs. And Trump has exposed that. That's why they want to get rid of Trump. As you saw with Ukraine, most of the Ukraine money going to Ukraine for the last decade wasn't going to Ukraine. We can't blame Zelensky for that, but we can't hold him accountable if he doesn't fix it. But we won't. Macron has made it clear he will not hold Zelensky responsible for anything. Now, Europe's gone to the UN, to the Security Council, to discuss the peace deal, but in an amazing development, EU and UK have discredited themselves repeatedly. They have tried to prolong the crisis. They refuse to settle the crisis and have been effectively removed from negotiations as Russia will not deal with them and the US will not force the issue. Europe has used up its chances, according to Russia, that they have given them multiple times, put them on notice about the security guarantees. The initial deal in 2014, when they said they would guarantee a formal agreement between Yanukovych and its opposition, they did not. They put in they held a coup and then called it a revolution of dignitary. That's Boris Johnson. This is why most people were upset with the Tories and almost voted them out of existence. Reform is making headways. Reform, for the first time in history this year, has been a minor party. Until this year was a minor party, is now polling 2% higher than Labour. Now, the only reason why Labour seems to win is the distribution of vote seems to always circle back from all the other parties back to Labour to keep reform out. That is a horrid system where your vote no longer matters. Where they decide your vote doesn't matter, we'll give it to the people you voted against. So, this is the problem. And then, of course, because it's first past the post, Labour wins all the seats in that district, which is ridiculous. Proportionate voting should mean proportionate representation. That means if 34% of the entire population vote for reform, that means 34% of all the available seats should go to reform. But instead you have this complicated system of preferential voting. No! You can't have two systems at once. But apparently England just doesn't want to fix anything. Nor does France, Germany, nor does... I think Ukraine is on the precipice. I think they realise they're not going to be part of NATO now, but there's a post-Putin era. Now, if a reconstructionist gets into Russia, though they're in second place, but they might be able to deliver a 3-point change that would see the European Security Council resumed, Russia having a seat at the table, a G7, and conditions on Ukraine, Belarus and others being part of because Russia wants to see NATO dismantled somewhat. They want to see European Security Council. So does parts of Europe. And if a reconstructionist got into most of Western Europe and parts of Eastern Europe and into Russia, they would rebuild Russia as a European nation, not as a Russian Asiatic nation. They will reduce their ties yet again with... Because remember, the reformists did not want ties with China. They warned against ties with China, saying that China would drag Russia into all its disputes. And that China would try to use Russia to take over their... Well, see, Russia is friends with Korea. Korea is an enemy of China. North Korea considers China an enemy. North Korea does not want unification. If a Reconstructionist government in South Korea could pull back, right, stop the war profiteering, and have a line of demarcation and peace with North Korea, because Korea was only briefly unified by Japan. And there probably was a few unified governments in the past, but it's never been unified for long. It was once known as the Three Kingdoms for a reason. All this warmongering is all built on drama of people who sit down, get bored, put their feet up on a desk and say, who can we F around with today? But right now, the world has F'd around and found out. And I think Marco Rubio wants to pull, if we can pull back the brink, we will avoid the situation where we have a collapse, a repeat of the collapse of the Balkans, which led to World War I, the collapse of Central Europe, which led to World War II. It's always the same thing. If we can avoid multiple countries collapsing, those countries won't get to start bigger wars to basically say, well, if we can't have success, our neighbours can't have success. We'll steal their gold reserves. Ha ha ha. But while that's not a possibility right now, it is a possibility in the future with the collapse if Europeans clearinghouses start stealing Russian resources to sell, people will start stockpiling gold again because they can't trust these stockbrokers to maintain sovereign trust funds. And, you know, it takes a long time and a lot of hurdles to get through. I mean, the shortest one right now is a series of cases in Japan for a company to compete in... to try and create a online payment system to compete against Visa and MasterCard. Now, I don't think they're going to make it. I don't think they have anywhere near the capital. I think it's just hoping that someone like Elon Musk or someone will take notice, but I think it will be all noise in the end. I think Visa and MasterCard will maintain their monopoly, putting too much stress on the Japanese to... and anybody who tries. But eventually, there will be competition in the online credit market, and that will grow and become online payment services that will basically end the monopoly as it stands. And this, of course, takes us a step closer to peace, because Ukraine, the only way to fix Ukraine is for Ukraine to be able to offer tangible, valuable, profit-earning relationships to repay its debts. Otherwise, Ukraine will be a failed state stuck at $400 billion in debt for centuries before those debts become wiped out. I mean, look at Argentina and look at many others, Bolivia. A lot of those countries only got out of debt because I think it was Reagan and the collapse of some US, but I think it was when Reagan said, hey, look, these, we'll write off these debts. But those were when debts were in the hundreds of millions, not billions. And back then, I don't think anybody knew that those wiping out those debts would create a new debt cycle, because people would say, oh, well, we'll just borrow money and the government will bail us out. So Zelensky is facing an issue in which there is no way to please more than half of Ukraine. Half of Ukraine will hate him no matter what he does. And if people keep dying, the more people who die, the less who will vote for him. Because the people who are fanatical nationalists who vote for Zelensky last time will not be alive to vote for him, because he'll send them to war to die for him. Because the only people who want to die for him are the nationalists. Those who didn't want to die for him have fled or won't fight, will get captured. And those who don't like him and get forced to fight, they will not vote for him after the war, so if they survive. But Zelensky has placed Yamik with Uranov. Uranov is not a nobody. He's not a noob. He's just somebody who doesn't make headlines. And I think right now they need a negotiator who can focus. Now, according to this, I said 26 earlier. Well, according to the Russians, the subsequent plan is down to 19 points, eliminating some of the initial proposals, such as the reductions to Ukraine's armed forces. There will be a military aid package. There will be, it looks like the banning of foreign military presence in Ukraine, and yeah. Ukraine does not want to instigate a ban on foreign military, and they do not want to recognize Crimea and Donbass. Ukraine won't have a choice. Will NATO shut the doors? Well, for now they will remain silent, but I think they will remain in the loop. However, talks are from the US to bar Ukraine from the alliance. It may be temporary. It may be a period of time. We don't know yet. And recognition of the Donbass and Crimea may come conditionally, such as where the battle lines lay, or a land swap of some sort to reduce how much land, some compensation demanded for the war, and Russia will say, F you. There'll be a few more weeks of war. Ukraine will be in a further terrible position, and as Europe continues to say, we cannot borrow more money. See, this is the thing. Who's going to loan money to Europe when it can't be repaid? And then they also run the risk of Europe just yanking their dollars, because, let's face it, we don't know how desperate they're going to get to fund Ukraine. And Europeans don't want to go to war in Ukraine. They're trying to manufacture consent. But if they keep pushing for war in Ukraine, it's going to have the opposite effect. The more you push Gen Z, the more they push back. It is glorious to see them standing up for themselves. They do not want to end up like millennials. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, or in my profile. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for sticking with me this far, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.